My father announced my brother's inheritance, at a dinner I cooked. In a house I maintained. At a table I sat. He didn't build up to it. There was no preamble, no softening of tone. He simply set down his glass, mid-meal, and began to speak. The way a man speaks when he has never once considered that he might be wrong. The business would go to Ezekiel. The ancestral home. Ezekiel. The family name, the legacy, the future, all of it. Ezekiel. And me? Wendy will be fine. She has a husband for that. Not a conversation. Not a question. A verdict. Delivered over food I had prepared with my own hands, in a room I had kept running for years, to a table full of people who nodded, like it was reasonable. Like it was obvious. Irene, seated across from me, a woman who had watched this family for decades, set her fork down. Slowly. She didn't look at my father. She looked at me. And I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push back my chair or walk out or demand an explanation. I picked up my father's glass, and I refilled it. Because that is what I had always done. That is what they had always counted on. But something shifted in that moment. Quietly. The way a foundation shifts before anyone notices the crack in the wall. My father looked at me and saw a daughter who had accepted it. He didn't see what was actually happening behind my eyes. He didn't see the math. He had spent years watching me hold everything together, and somehow concluded that I needed nothing. That I wanted nothing. That I could be set aside like a chair pushed back from a table that no longer needed it. He was so certain. And that certainty was the first mistake. It would not be the last. Let me tell you what a typical Tuesday looked like for me. 6:45 in the morning. I'm on the phone with my father's pharmacist because his blood pressure prescription had a refill error and nobody else noticed. 7:30. I'm forwarding 3 vendor invoices to Ezekiel's email with color-coded notes because he won't know what to do with them otherwise. By 9. I'm coordinating a contractor visit to the family property, rescheduling a billing call for the business, and tracking down a document my father swore he filed but hadn't. By noon, I hadn't started my own work yet. This was not an unusual day. This was Tuesday. I was 31 years old. I had a degree, a professional license, and a reputation, in every circle outside my family, as someone who made complicated things run smoothly. Inside my family, I was just Wendy. Reliable. Available. There. I didn't complain. Complaining felt like weakness, and I had been taught, in the quiet, persistent way families teach things without ever saying them aloud, that a good daughter carries the weight and says nothing. Irene had watched me do this for years. She never pitied me. She'd just look at me sometimes, with this expression I couldn't quite name back then. I understand it now. It was recognition. The look of a woman who had seen this story before. What nobody in that house knew, not my father, not Ezekiel, was that 4 years earlier, I had opened a business registration in my own name. A care management consultancy. Small, quiet, growing. Built in the margins of every hour they weren't looking. Because somewhere beneath the medication schedules and the vendor calls and the Tuesday mornings that never belonged to me, I had understood something. I had always understood it, actually. I just hadn't been ready to act on it. Until the night my father poured himself a glass of wine, cleared his throat, and told me exactly where I stood. He thought he was delivering news. He was giving me permission. My father was not a cruel man. I want to be precise about that, because cruelty would have been easier to name. Easier to leave. What he was certain. Certain the way a wall is certain. Immovable not out of malice, but out of sheer, settled weight. He had grown up in a world with a particular shape, sons carry names, daughters carry households, and that world had never once pushed back hard enough to make him question it. So it hardened into fact. Into just the way things are. I could trace it in small moments long before the dinner. The time I presented an idea for restructuring the business's vendor contracts, and my father nodded slowly, turned to Ezekiel, and said, "What do you think, son?" As if I had been reading from a script someone else had written. The time I sat in on a meeting with the family's accountant and was introduced as Ezekiel's sister. not by my name. By my relation to him. The time my father patted my hand at the kitchen table and said, warmly, with complete sincerity, "Your real job, Wendy, is to be a good wife someday. Everything else is just practice." He meant it kindly. That was the part that stayed with me longest. And then there was Ezekiel. My brother, who I genuinely do not hate. He is not a villain. He is something more frustrating than a villain. He is a man who was handed every door already open and simply walked through them, never once looking back to see who had turned the handle. He had never had to earn anything. And it showed. Not in obvious ways, but in the texture of how he moved. The slight hesitation before any task that required sustained effort. The confidence that evaporated the moment no one was there to catch the mistake. My father gave Ezekiel an inheritance. What he actually gave him was a deadline. The morning after the dinner, I woke up at 6:15. I made coffee. I checked my father's medication schedule. I forwarded 2 emails for Ezekiel that he hadn't responded to. I did all of it, exactly as I always had. But I was watching now. Where before I had moved through these tasks on instinct, out of habit, out of duty, I moved through them now like an auditor. Noting. Cataloging. Measuring. I sat down that evening and wrote a list. Every single thing I did for this family that no one else could do. Or more accurately, that no one else had ever bothered to learn to do, because I had always been there to do it for them. The list was long. Longer than I expected, even knowing what I knew. 17 distinct responsibilities. Some daily. Some weekly. All invisible. Irene called that night. We didn't talk about the dinner directly. We talked, instead, about capacity. About what a person can build when they stop pouring their best hours into a container with someone else's name on it. She didn't tell me what to do. She never did. She just asked, very quietly. "What would you do, Wendy, if Tuesday mornings were yours?" I already knew the answer. I had known it for 4 years. The next morning, I made one change. Just one. I did not reschedule the contractor appointment for the family property. I sent Ezekiel the contractor's number instead, with a single line, "He'll need to hear from you directly." Then I opened my laptop and called my first consultancy client. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, they asked when I could start. I said Monday. I didn't announce what I was doing. I didn't send a letter or make a speech or give my father the dignity of a confrontation he could respond to. I simply began. The way water begins. Quietly. At the lowest available point. Finding its own direction. The nod I gave at that dinner table was not surrender. It was the starting gun. It did not happen all at once. That was important. A sudden disappearance would have caused alarm. Questions. A conversation I wasn't ready to have and they weren't ready to hear. So I did it the way I did everything, methodically, without drama, one task at a time. Week 1, I stopped managing the prescription refill calls. I left the pharmacy's number on the kitchen counter with a note that said Ezekiel has this. He didn't, yet. But he would figure it out. Week 2, the vendor invoices stopped arriving in Ezekiel's inbox pre-sorted and color-coded. They arrived the way they always had, as raw documents, requiring attention, requiring knowledge he didn't have. I watched from a distance as 3 of them went past due. Week 3, the contractor called about the property inspection. I did not answer. He called Ezekiel next. Ezekiel, to his credit, answered. He did not know what the contractor was referring to. The appointment was missed. None of this was cruelty. I want to be clear about that, the way I was clear about my father. I was not dismantling something out of spite. I was simply stopping. Releasing. Choosing not to spend one more hour of my life being essential to people who had decided, formally and out loud, that I was optional. The family continued to operate as though I were still there. For a while. The way a room stays warm after the heat has been turned off, there is a lag, a false comfort, before the cold arrives. Ezekiel assumed the difficulty was temporary. New role, adjustment period, bad luck. My father assumed I was still managing things from a slight distance. Neither of them thought to ask me directly. That told me everything I needed to know. Meanwhile, I signed my second client. I was building something. And the hours I had freed were the bricks. There is a specific kind of document, the kind that keeps a business breathing, that lives in a very particular place. Not in a cloud system, not in a shared drive. In a physical blue folder, in the second drawer of a filing cabinet, organized by quarter. I knew where it was. I had put it there. Ezekiel did not know the folder existed. He found this out when the accountant asked for it, and he spent 40 minutes looking before calling me. I answered. I told him where it was. Once. He also did not know the name of the long-standing vendor who required a personal call every quarter, not an email, a call, or he would take his business elsewhere. That vendor had been with the family for 11 years. He left in month 4. Bartholomew blamed the economy. I said nothing. I had moved into my own apartment by then. Quietly, practically. A lease signed on a Tuesday morning, one of the ones that now belonged to me. I did not make an announcement. I simply stopped being there. Irene came to visit 3 weeks after I moved in. She stood in the doorway, looked at the space, clean, calm, mine, and didn't say a word for a moment. Then she said, "You look like yourself." I hadn't realized, until she said it, how long it had been since that was true. My father called twice that week. Ezekiel called once. I answered each of them. I was brief, complete, and warm. I was not cold to them. Coldness would have been its own kind of attachment. What I offered instead was something more final, the particular evenness of a woman who has already made her decision and feels no need to defend it. My third client signed on a Friday. I took myself to dinner that night. Alone. A restaurant I chose, a table by the window, a meal I didn't cook for anyone else. It was the best meal I'd had in years. The calls came in patterns. Ezekiel first, usually in the mornings, practical questions, operational gaps, the growing list of things he hadn't known he didn't know. Where is the insurance binder? Who handles the quarterly tax estimate? What's the password for the business account? I answered each one. Once. Completely. Correctly. And then I did not follow up. I did not check whether he had acted on it. I did not send a reminder. I gave the information, and I let it go. What he did with it was no longer mine to carry. My father's calls came in the evenings. They were softer, not asking for specific information so much as asking for me. The version of me that absorbed things. That smoothed things over. That made the difficulty feel manageable just by being present inside it. I was warm with him. I was. But I was warm from a distance now, and distance changes the temperature of everything. The calls increased as the months passed. The urgency climbed. And I noticed something I turned over carefully, without bitterness, the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. For years, I had believed they didn't notice what I did. I was wrong. They noticed everything. Every system I ran, every relationship I maintained, every quiet thing I handled before it became a crisis. They noticed, they simply assumed it would always be available. That I was a utility. That you don't appreciate running water until the pipe runs dry. And now the pipe had redirected. I wasn't punishing them. I had stopped thinking in terms of punishment somewhere around month 3. Punishment is still a form of entanglement. What I was doing was simpler and more permanent. I was building a life where I was the point, not the infrastructure. There is a difference. I was only just learning how large that difference actually was. 8 months after the dinner, the family business was in crisis. Not collapsing dramatically, nothing so clean. It was eroding. The way things erode when the person who understood the details quietly steps away and the people left behind don't know enough to know what they're missing. A major vendor pulled their contract. Not with anger, just with finality. The relationship had degraded, calls unanswered, invoices disputed incorrectly, the personal rapport that had taken years to build gone unattended until it simply ended. A property maintenance agreement lapsed because no one had renewed it. A renewal that I had set a calendar reminder for, every year, for 6 years running. The reminder was still on my phone. I looked at it, and I let it pass. Bartholomew and Ezekiel began to fracture. I heard this secondhand, through Irene, who heard it the way women in families always hear things, through the walls, between the lines. My father had expected Ezekiel to rise to the responsibility. Ezekiel had expected the responsibility to be easier. Neither expectation was surviving contact with reality. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, I got a notification on my phone. A regional business newsletter. A small feature, half a page, a photo, a quote. My consultancy. My name. Irene texted me 40 minutes later. No greeting, no preamble. Just, there you are. 2 words. I read them 3 times. The following week, I took a meeting with the largest client I'd been approached by, a regional healthcare group looking for exactly the kind of structured care management I had spent my whole career learning to do. For free. For people who hadn't noticed. They noticed. I didn't tell my father. It was not out of secrecy. It was simply that it had nothing to do with him anymore. My life had moved into a territory where he was no longer the audience. The gap between the 2 trajectories, Ezekiel's slow unraveling, my steady climb, had stopped being something I tracked. I was too busy moving forward to look back. He came on a Sunday. I heard the knock and I knew, before I opened the door, who it was. There is a particular sound to an expectation. You learn to recognize it when you've been on the receiving end of it long enough. My father stood on the step of a home he had never visited. Smaller than the ancestral house. Mine. Every corner of it chosen by me, paid for by me, filled with things that had no obligation attached to them. He looked older than I expected. Not frail, just reduced. The way a man looks when the world has not confirmed what he believed about it, and he hasn't yet found a way to make that make sense. He said he needed help. He said the business was struggling. He said Ezekiel was trying but the situation required, and here he paused, looking for the word, someone with your particular way of seeing things. He didn't say he was wrong. He didn't say he was sorry. He said family several times, and what he meant each time was resource. I had learned to hear the difference. I invited him in. I made tea. I sat across from him at my own table and I listened to the full shape of the problem, the vendor loss, the filing backlog, the fracture with Ezekiel. I listened the way I had always listened, completely, precisely, without interrupting. And then I told him exactly what I would do if I were him. Specific. Practical. Valuable advice. The kind that would cost him several $100s an hour from anyone he'd find in the directory. And then I stood up. I did not offer to come back. I did not offer my time. I did not offer to be the solution to a problem created by my removal. I walked him to the door, and I said, gently and finally, I hope it helps. He sat in his car outside for a long time. I watched from the window. I felt, not triumph. Something quieter. Something that felt, for the first time in a very long while, like peace. Time passed. The way time passes after something irreversible, not quickly, not slowly, but with a new quality of light. The family business stabilized. Barely, and at significant cost, Ezekiel eventually hired someone to do what I had done. A professional. Contracted, compensated, boundaried. He resented the expense. I found that almost funny. The work had always cost something. He simply used to pay for it in a currency he didn't recognize as real. My father did not apologize. Not formally. Not in words that named what had happened. But somewhere in the months that followed, he stopped saying she will be fine. I noticed its absence before I could name it. The phrase simply disappeared from his vocabulary. And in its place was something I had not seen from him before, a quiet, careful attention when I spoke. As if he was finally listening for what was actually being said. It was not enough to undo what was done. I had stopped needing it to be. My consultancy had 3 full-time staff by spring. The healthcare contract had renewed. I was being asked to speak at a regional conference, a woman who had spent the better part of a decade being invisible, now being asked to stand in a room and teach others what she knew. Irene came for dinner on a Saturday in April. We sat at my table, the one I had chosen, in the home I had bought, in a life with no invisible labor hiding inside it. We ate, we talked, we laughed about small things. Nothing to prove. Nowhere to perform. At the end of the night, clearing the plates, she said, "Your father thought he was protecting his legacy. He didn't realize he was sitting across from it." I thought about that for a long time afterward. He thought silence was weakness. He didn't understand that some women go quiet the way a storm goes quiet. Not because it's over. Because it's organizing. And I had organized. Beautifully.